Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Music Talks podcast, the show where we dive into albums and songs from the past and present, and it is your number one destination of discovering new music that you're sure to like. And today I am joined by Mr. Don Rodriguez. Don is a music producer and founder of the I&I Music Studio, a recording studio, record label, and music publisher for independent artists. He's created a new record contract where the artists own their masters and their publishing, and the label collects the points. A complete 180 on how the music industry has been operating for the last 70 years. He's here to discuss his studio, the new label, and how independent artists can under a label and own their own masters and publishing. So, Don, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have for us, and welcome to Music Talks.
Thank you for having me, Noah. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my music studio and talk about albums. And thank you for keeping it going, the discussion about music and albums in particularly. I find it to be very important, a very important part of human art and the legacy that we leave behind. So thanks. Thanks for what you do, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, you've got a really good business going for you, and you're helping so many new artists come out with just kind of an easier way for them to be able to own all their masters and just make the music industry easier. But tell me a little bit about how you got into music and kind of share a little bit about what kind of inspired you to work in the music industry.
Well, I'm a second generation musician, and my hobby always tended to be music while I was working at a construction career, real estate development, which I was in for 25 years. And at the tail end of 2025, I decided to bring that to an end, and I was kind of done with the whole real estate development and construction scene. And as it turned out, I had built a studio over the years for me and my friends to play and produce in. And so it took a little bit of work to get the sound right in this studio. We're halfway underground where I'm at, 12-foot ceilings. I built a series of sound baffles and stages, and I wanted to recreate a venue type of feel, but without the audience. And so I feel like that's what I've done here. And so I opened the studio up in 2025 to other artists that are looking to produce their music. And the only requirement is that you're an independent artist and that you play and that you gig and that you want to make music. Not a whole lot of requirements. So if you take it seriously, we're here to help you. Um, we do have fully funded programs in which the studio funds your record project, but it's who we select to do that. So as an example, we just funded a new artist named Michael Kenna, and he is working on an album right now. As a matter of fact, we just finished all of his demos, recording all of his demos for his 10-track album yesterday. And so I'm going to be getting those copyrighted over the weekend. And then we'll publish those to secret private YouTube accounts so that we have a record of when they were first published and known to the world. And then we'll start working with them immediately after that. We'll start working with other artists to bring in other components of the songs, like bass player, drummer, stuff like that. And we'll fill out the songs and then build the album and then release it. I would say, you know, if we can get it out before Christmas, I think that'd be a really good project. So just signed him not even 2 weeks ago, and just finished the demos yesterday. So he's ready to go. I'm ready to go. But then we have other artists as well that come in, they pay for studio time and they produce their music here, but not through me. They produce their music just as a pay for studio services, and we get a lot of that. And I'm happy to help everyone, and I'm always here, so I always give my best advice, and I tend to chime in and things that I hear, things that I think could be better, my ideas. Sometimes artists take them, sometimes they don't. But 100% of the time, the artist owns their masters and their compositions, which is the publishing side of music. So that's our philosophy here is that artists own their music. So we start there. There's not a basis in which, well, if we do this, we own a little bit here and there. If we fully fund you, we do recoup funds 50-50 when the music comes out. But after recoupment, we're out. So the artist retains 100% of their music, with the exception of recoupment to the studio for cost to produce if we decided to fund your project. So that's how we work here at the studio.
No, usually what most people would imagine or believe when it comes to the music industry is that the record label itself kind of controls all this stuff. Why do you think a lot of the recording studios are not like yours, where the artists are able to have full masters and full control over their work?
Well, it begins with the product, right? I'm a 20-year entrepreneur. So, layered among everything else is I understand how business works. And the product of music is the musical track that is produced in a recording studio like the one you see behind me. And so far, the label and the artist and the publisher, they've only had the one product, which is this music track or a compilation of music tracks that we call an album. And everyone rides the coattails of that music. It is the only product. And every dollar that's going to be generated for all three entities, the artist, the label, and the publisher, every dollar that's going to be generated is going to be generated simply from that musical track. And so I feel like in today's day and age, it's important to diversify what you create, and so that you can get on different platforms so that we're not all riding the same coattails of just music. So here at this studio, in the background, when you come in and you produce your record here, whether it's studio funded or artist funded, we are always rolling camera behind the scenes footage here at this studio. We call that label content. So we produce our own product here at the studio in terms of label content. And then we also produce a show called Soundstage Las Vegas, which features independent artists playing their original music. And that can be found on our YouTube channel. Pardon me. And so my philosophy is that we get away from the single product, which is music. And so how I'm able to make this work, or at least I shouldn't say it works, how it's the contract is structured is that we're producing our own product here at the label, and you're producing your music product, and you get to own that product, and we get to own our product, which is behind the scene coverage, the making of all of our podcast, Soundstage Las Vegas, all the other things that we do for artists. So that kind of segues into the new modern studio, which is what you're seeing here at the I&I Music Studio. What you're looking at right now, I'm sitting on the sound stage where we perform music and cut masters. We also perform Soundstage Las Vegas right here on this very stage. And behind me, behind the logo that's behind me, is Studio B. That is where we create content. It's a diversified studio. It acts as a photography studio, a dance studio, and a content studio. So we produce different content there. We just shot a music video for one of our artists on Sunday, this past Sunday. And then to my right, your left, is our podcast studio, interview studio, and our vocal booth. So it doubles as a vocal booth to get really good sounding vocals when we have a great vocalist in the studio. And then also as a podcast booth, it has a room for a host and three guests. And this is where we'll go and we'll take our artists and do a podcast interview of them, get a bunch of shorts, talk about their career, talk about their music, talk about their life, create a bunch of shorts ready for social media that the artist can use. So it's a diversified, multi-use studio. Can't just be a music studio anymore. I mean, you know this as well as anyone. Everybody's got a music studio. Between you and I, there's at least 100. So that's not the hard part anymore. The hard part in today's music industry is being heard. The making music was the easy part. When I was a kid, making music and being in a studio like this one was a dream. But now that's not the case anymore. What is a dream is actually being heard. And the reason that is because there are 100,000 songs uploaded to Spotify and other platforms a day. I think the statistic ending in 2025 was 120,000 songs a day. So that's a million songs every 10 days, which is 3 million songs a month. So if you are an independent artist and you are aggressively, with an aggressive schedule of releasing one song a month, which that is crazy, but there's some artists doing it. But if you are releasing one song a month, you are one single among 3 million singles that month. If you are more still aggressive, but a little more conservative at one single every 2 months, this is more where your professional artists are about right here. One single every 2 months, and this is still aggressive, like I said. Now you are one single among 6 million singles, right? So how do you get heard? That is the real challenge in today's music industry, and we do that by producing electronic uh, public EPKs. I always forget what the acronym is. I always got EPK, which is your electronic press kit. Thank you very much. Electronic press kits here in Studio B. We do choreography in Studio B. We do dance videos and interviews in Studio B. We do interviews in the podcast studio. We do Soundstage Las Vegas appearances here for our YouTube channel. So we do a lot of different things for our artists, again, to be heard, to be out there on multiple platforms, doing multiple things. The more you're seen, the more likely you're going to be picked up by a big label, which is really what we do. We like to take artists, shine them up, artists that we believe in, shine them up, get them ready for the big time.
And one of the things that we kind of talked about that I thought was very interesting, and we had opinions on it too, was albums and kind of how they're constructed now and how they're released to the public. Um, growing up in the 2000s and even before 2000s and before, even in the early 2010s, a lot of artists usually got a lot of their sales through physical copies, where this was CD copies that were released out to stores, to businesses, and they got paid money from that. Now it's kind of switched over to streaming and digital downloads and buying the album online. How has popular streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, and all this how much of an impact have those platforms had on physical albums?
Oh my gosh. Well, they've nearly decimated the physical album industry and the CD industry. It has never been better for the music industry. And that says a lot because in the era that you spoke about in your heyday, CDs were the most profitable product that record labels had ever put out. And they were so cheap to make, but yet they looked futuristic. And so people were willing to pay more for them, even though they were cheaper to produce than the vinyls. And so there's a whole history to albums and singles, which I'm a little bit of a nerd. I find fascinating. I really like to dive into it, but I'll give you the 10,000 foot elevation. It started about 100 years ago when people wanted to take music home. Right now, everything is at our fingertips, and we can listen to anything we want: podcasts, music, speeches, whatever. But 100 years ago, it wasn't like that. To enjoy music, you had to go out to the opera or to the theater to enjoy Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for example. 100 still popular to this day. 100 years ago, very popular. Now, you would go see the performance and then you'd go home and you would try to hum as much as you could. It just wasn't feasible. Then you had the advent of the phonograph or the invention of the phonograph, which enabled people to record and bring this music home. And the first was a cylindrical type of wax element that played music, and it had the funny, flower looking tube. And then it switched over to flat vinyls because the wax kept melting, and those they didn't travel very well. And so it quickly, in the, I want to say 1920s, let's say, so literally 100 years ago, came out to the flat vinyl wax that we know today, that is still collectible and is making a little comeback. Now, the reason it's called albums is because the very first flat discs on wax rotated at 78 RPMs, and they can only play about anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes of music. So let's call it 4 minutes of music on one side, 4 minutes on the other. And so what happened for, again, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for example, is 10 concertos, and it runs about an hour and 10 minutes long. And so to get them on all of these wax editions, so that you could take Beethoven's Ninth Symphony home and listen to it, they produced multiple small records and put them in what looked like a photo album. This would have been 1930, and that's where it got the name, an album. And then in the late 30s, the RPM changed to 33 and a half RPMs, which means, and the technology changed. The needle got smaller. And so you could get more music on that flat plastic. And so then you were able to get about 45 minutes on each side of a record. And then so the physical album, which was multiple discs in a photo album looking thing, then came to the pocket, the single, larger disc in a sleeve, in a cardboard sleeve, but it kept the name album. And then from album, the media changed to 8 tracks. And again, the I think usually the catalyst for the change in media is cost to reproduce at mass, at scale, right? So the more people who listen to music, the more you have to produce, and so you want to make it cheaper. So they went from vinyl records to 8 tracks, and then they went from 8 track tapes to cassette tapes, and cassette tapes to CDs, which is about where you came in, and then from CDs to streaming. Now, what is interesting about streaming, and I don't want to bore everyone, but this is where it gets very, very interesting. And back to your original question, what's interesting about streaming is for the last 100 years, there was a product involved where you and I would make a purchase and we would bring the music home. And the proceeds of that purchase went directly back to three parties: the artist, the label, and the publisher. And we'll talk about that separately if you'd like. But there was a product involved, a tangible product. And when Napster came along, they illegally started streaming, sharing digital copies of the music. And of course, the labels didn't like that. Big labels didn't like that. They took them to court and they won. But it's not exactly that they were defeated. You'll notice again with AI, and we'll talk about this in 2 minutes, the record industry will defeat someone, but not to put you out of business, but more to say, it's not that we don't want you doing what you're doing. We just want you doing it for us. And so this kind of happened with Napster and not Napster itself, but it merged into a company called Spotify. And Spotify said, well, we'll take the same concept that Napster has, which is to put digital copies of the music online for people to listen to. And we'll just do it with your permission, which is, the big labels. And so the big labels said, okay, well, we, first of all, every board member wants $1 million before we even say yes. And then secondly, we want 50% of every cent you make. And they said, okay, no problem. Prior to this, however, I left out a little bit of part. Apple had gotten into the scene before Spotify, kind of in the transition. And they had the same idea of digital music, but their idea was simply to sell singles. And so Apple Music, iTunes, if you recall, their MP3 platform, their iPod platform concept was, instead of buying an entire album like we used to have to, we'll just buy a single. And so in that era of this change, Spotify came and you had two competing models, right? This is in the era you're talking about at the end of the 2000s, 2010, when we transitioned out of CDs into Spotify. The big labels had two models. They had Apple iTunes model, which was selling singles at 99 cents each. And that was okay. No one was, ringing bells over at the big labels. And then you had Spotify's model, which was, instead of selling a single, you will pay a subscription rate of $9.99. I forget what they opened at. It might have even been $7.99 back then. Everyone will pay a subscription rate, and you'll have access to a library, a catalog of music, and you will essentially listen whenever you'd like on this device. But essentially, no one really caught on that we were leasing the music now. We didn't really own it unless we download it and purchase it. And so when you had the two competing models, the big labels learned real quickly that they were making a heck of a lot more money with Spotify than they were making with iTunes. And so when it came up time for Apple to release or renegotiate the terms of their catalog lease from the big publishing, the big labels. The big labels said, we're not going to release unless you go to Spotify's system, which is providing a digital copy for people to listen to whenever they'd like, but at a subscription rate service. And that became Apple Music. And the battle still goes on, right? Amazon is still in the mix trying to sell music, but wherever it is, the labels don't really like it. And now, because I started way back from the production of music on wax, then vinyl, and then tape, and then CDs, and now nothing, you can see why I said in the beginning, the big labels, it's never been more profitable. They're producing no tangible product except for the albums, but only for their largest artists. Let's be honest. If you go to the record store now, only their largest artists are they producing albums for, the physical vinyl records for. And that's just because they're collectible and kind of making a comeback. But for me, for example, and another artist I have here, Maestro Arcana, who just produced his record. Um, if he wants albums, we're going to have to pay about $2,500 for 100 vinyl records, and then it's our job to go out and sell them to our friends and family, and which is cool. And we do this. This is exactly what we do here because I think that's a great opportunity to get new fans and new listeners. But that tangible product is gone, and that money that went back to the artist in the form of that tangible product transaction is gone. Now you have a subscription, and everyone in the big label and Spotify has their hands in the subscription rate. And I think a lot of artists are getting shorted. I think the biggest one is Snoop Doggy Dogg brought a lot of attention to this last year on how he had if he had sold 1 million records back in the day, he'd be living
Mhm.
rich. But 1 million streams on Spotify, is like a $2,500 check. It's very, very different now. So it's a problem for artists. And if you do believe in independent music and independent musicians, then I suggest checking out Bandcamp. Bandcamp is the same platform style as Spotify. Forgive me, that was a text message. Bandcamp is the same type of a platform, but you're actually buying the music. The artist uploads their music to Bandcamp, and the transaction is between you and me, the artist. And almost every dollar is coming back to me for that transaction. So it's going to take a lot of work to transition everyone from Spotify to Bandcamp. But that's what I'm here to do. I'm just going to keep promoting it until more people join and support independent artists that way.
Now, do you think we've reached that point where this is kind of going to be the normalcy for a long time, or what do you think? Where do you think albums sales would be maybe 10 years or even longer than that from now? What do you think would be coming after streaming?
We're going back to the tangible product. Uh, you know, and let me take that back. We'll stay streaming, but the artists are going to own it. And the artists are going to find studios like mine that respect the artist and their art and their image, their likeness, their voice, and they're willing to copyright, trademark every part about you, and then give you ownership of everything that is yours. That's our philosophy here at this studio. Now, I'll tell you, the big labels, they're laughing, right? They see a small studio like mine, they're like, these guys are going to be out of business in 5 years. Maybe I will. I doubt it, but it won't matter because the trend is shifting my way. And what the big labels don't understand is when I said in the beginning, we've all been, or not we've, they've all been riding the coattails of one single product, which is the music. And so what you're finding now is artists like Bruno Mars, who I admire greatly, are pulling out and saying, you know what, I'm not signing another record contract. They figured out that a record contract from a major label that includes a signing bonus is a bad deal for any artist. And I know that there's a lot of starving artists out there, and that's their dream is to get this $1 million signing bonus in a record deal. But I'm telling you, in this day and age, you don't want it, right? Try and push it away. Text Bruno Mars if you can get a hold of him and ask him why. But what happens is very much like a credit card company, the labels have figured out a way to keep the artist in debt constantly, and you never get out of this record contract, whether it's options that the label exercises because you sign the original and the original says as long as all the terms are, like the last time we have the right to two more options. So now you're making two more records. That's one thing. All the merch, there's 360 deal now. All the labels carry these large 360 deals. I apologize. What that is, it means that the label gets a cut of everything that the artist does, performances, merchandise, interviews, anywhere the artist might be, the label's getting a cut of that. So what's happening is that artists are getting tired of it. And so more and more artists are taking Bruno Mars's route of performing and performing and performing until the end of his contract, until he's out of debt from that heavy, from the burden of those record contracts, and then he can go somewhere else and sign something that's more independent. Olivia Rodrigo, for example, I think she just signed with a more independent, we'll say, record label. But what we mean by that is that's a record label that gives the artist, or at least recognizes the artist's ownership of their masters. And no one's talking about compositions right now, Noah, but I just jumped the shark and I went straight to compositions. Now that is publishing. Now, and let me just hit on this very, very quickly. When I was a young person, the big talk for artists was creative license. In the 80s and 90s, artists wanted to have full creative control of what they recorded on their albums. They didn't want the label telling them, "Oh, here's a song we want you to record and you don't get to say anything about it." That was a big deal then. Fast forward now, pardon me, and the topic of discussion is masters. Artists want to own their masters. Well, if you know anything about music, masters is one half of a piece of music. The other half is the composition, which is publishing. No one's talking about this over here. And I've just gone ahead and say, well, you know what? We're not gonna wait another 10 years, 20 years to talk about publishing. We're just gonna go straight ahead. And here at the I&I Music Studio, the artist owns their masters and their compositions, which is publishing.
I think one really good example, modern example of like artists being able to get their own music back was Taylor Swift. And I know she had a long, everlasting battle trying to get her own master. She kind of pre-recorded all of her albums and released them. And then I think it was last year or year before that. It might have been a year or two ago. She finally got a lot of the rights to her old albums back to where she could actually was able to have control over that. Do you think more artists should focus more on trying to get rights to their albums back, or does it just really depend on on the company and the record label that they work for?
Yeah, it depends on the terms of your contract, I would say. And in her case, I think she had a very valid argument in which the publishing, and this is very big label-esque, which is they like to keep control of the catalog amongst themselves. What a catalog is a library of music. Now, there's audio catalogs and there's video catalogs. Worldwide Pants, for example, if you're familiar with the David Letterman distribution, this is a video publishing, and they own a catalog of TV shows and movies and stuff. Same in music. Um, Sony owns this huge catalog of music. Doesn't mean that they even had any part in producing it, but over the years they trade music over time. And what's important to remember as an artist is that a copyright lasts 100 years. So for Maestro Arcana, who just produced his record here in the studio, we copyrighted his album last week. So for 100 years, that music is going to belong to him, and anyone who reproduces it in any way is going to be sending him 50 cents on every dollar. So what's happening is on the publishing end, that 100-year asset, they buy and sell and trade amongst themselves. I know I'm long-winded, but I'm getting back to Taylor Swift. What happened, what triggered this whole thing with Taylor Swift was that her publishing company was going to sell her catalog to someone else. Well, by this time, Taylor Swift's got $500 million in the bank. So she's like, I want to buy it, you know? And I
Hmm.
think what rightly set her off, and this is going back years, and I'm following what I know about the whole case. But what rightly set her off was like, well, why aren't you selling to me? And the publishing company was like, well, you're the artist. I can sell the artist. I can only sell to another publisher, which in this case had to happen to be Scooter Braun, I think is his name. And
Yeah.
so he bought the catalog. And so all hell broke loose after that, pardon my language. And and so I don't think that she ever controlled. I think she might have some control over them now. But she ended up in her fight, she ended up re-recording all of her masters, which was a great move. I mean, but it's a I'm going to tell you, I think that that's a move that she pulled off with perfect timing, and it was in a perfect space, and she had a perfect fan base, and she had a perfect product, a perfect catalog of music for a perfect performer. She is fantastic. She's absolutely fantastic. I haven't seen her perform, but I sent my wife and daughters to see her Eras tour, and they told me it's fantastic, Dad. I'm like, I'll take your word for it. I'm not a Swiftie myself, but everything she's done is like just picture perfect. I don't know that I would go that route because there were factors that made her profitable in re-recording her masters that for another artist might not have happened. I'm just going to be honest here. Like Taylor Swift, the Swiftie fan base is so strong that she was able to engage them into repurchasing a new product. Think of any other artist that would come to you and say, "Hey, man, that other label stunk, and I re-released my record. Can you buy it again?" I mean, it just there ain't many, I mean, but she had it and she did it. She pulled it off. I think it's like one and only time we're ever going to see someone in mobilize their fan base in such a way. So I wouldn't advise it. I think it's just more advantageous to understand the terms of your contract, seek legal help if you're in a record contract and you realize, oh, I've got another option. I'm going to be with these people for at least two more albums. What do I do? I don't like anyone here. I would say seek legal counsel so that first you can understand your contract and understand your options, and then figure out, okay, how far in debt am I into the studio? Because it is not because producing a record is cheap. It is not the label is not doing anything. That's not the problem here. The label has a huge amount of responsibility, and they are taking on the burden of all these costs to launch artists with EPKs, electronic press kits, and all kinds of other things, tours, merchandise, the studio recordings, albums, studio musicians. None of this stuff is cheap. So all of those upfront costs is what puts the music in debt to begin with. And so when you add $1 million or $2 million sign-in bonus, like I said, like very similar to their credit card industry, the music industry has figured out if we give them this amount of money, they will be in debt to us forever, and they will just be a label artist, which is based essentially an employee. And I don't think this isn't news. I think people are just beginning to shed the light on how that works and how abused artists have been in the music industry for that reason. But anyway, we'll get through it. We'll change it.
So when artists release their albums on streaming platforms, how do they get kind of the revenue from streaming? Do this has always been kind of a thing that I've never really fully understand. I know that on iTunes and I'm pretty sure on other platforms where you have to purchase music, they get like a small fraction. But if say if you paid the kind of the membership for Spotify and Apple, that you don't have to buy the album on there, you can just stream it for free. You just have to sign up with a subscription. How do artists get paid if you just stream their album compared to just purchasing their album?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. Okay, so with regard to streaming, we'll talk about that first. So it all goes back to the catalog. Remember that the big label, they own the library of music, and they're going to lease this library of music to Spotify. Spotify says, thanks. We are going to sell that library of music as subscriptions back to all of our customers out there. And so what the customers are doing at 1099, 14.99, whatever package you pick, what the customers are doing is putting all of this money into a large pot that goes to the labels. Well, the labels are now saying, okay, well, this large pot, this 14.99 subscription is much lower than the 18.99 albums that you guys used to buy. And everyone can admit, yeah, that's true, right? I'm paying 14.99 a month for access to unlimited amounts of music, where before, if I wanted that same amount of music, I would be paying, $1,000 a month to go buy it if I wanted to do that. So that part's true. The part that they just want to never mind and look the other way is that they're no longer producing a product, an album. There's no cost, there's no shipping, there's no vinyl, there's no cardboard, there's no artwork. Even the artwork is, graphic now. And so all of that cost is gone. So it is a huge tilt into the favor of the music industry. And so what that happens is essentially, as I was saying, it all goes into this pot. And then the Spotify and each platform is required to report the number of streams and who's getting what streams. And then they divvy up basically percentage wise that huge pot. Yeah, these are big mathematical problems, but it's all done on computers now. So they just figure out who gets what share. And because that amount is so small, artists are getting, dollars where they used to get $100 bills are now getting dollar bills, and independent artists get cents, almost nothing. Now, converse to that, when we go back to the physical product, you're purchasing that product. So yeah, even if at the end of the day, if it cost me, you know, $2,000 to get these albums made, and then I sold them to all my friends and family members for 20 bucks each, and at the end of the day, I've got $500 in my pocket. Any independent artist right now listening to this is like, that's awesome, great job. Because to get $500 from Spotify, 3, 4 years of music streaming, begging all of our people, please listen to my song. It's really, really difficult that way. So those are the differences. So now when you get back to at scale, a huge artist selling millions of albums, like, Prince, Michael Jackson, Madonna, One Direction, Maroon 5, Taylor Swift, whomever. Now at scale for that tangible product, that $500 becomes $5 million. And the artists are back to becoming these huge celebrities that they used to be. But I'll be honest, you can find online on YouTube and TikTok more and more artists, mainstream artists that you know and heard of, that are talking about, I'm broke. I don't have any money. I'm not getting paid. It's a real thing. It is bizarre, but it's very real.
To any artists that are maybe listening, if they're up and coming or they just started out and they are not fully getting their full contract expectations or just really are confused about how this industry works, what advice do you have for them of how they need to go about signing record deals and signing contracts and what to look out for and knowing if what the label that they're working for is a good fit?
Yeah, man, this is a great question. And this one's probably the easiest to accomplish. Upload the contract to AI, ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, pick your poison, Claude. I'm a big fan of Claude, by the way. Any one of them, though. I use all of them. Upload them, not for producer music, but upload your contract to AI and say, I'm an independent artist, with this, that, and the other thing. Analyze this contract. How does it benefit me? What are the pros? What are the cons? Scan that thing and upload it to AI. Like I said, this has never, ever, ever, ever been easier in the history of mankind for artists to protect themselves. If you are entering a bad contract in 2026, it's your fault. That's on you. You're choosing to. There's really no reason to.
Well, Don, thank you so, so much for taking time to come on the podcast today to share this wonderful conversation and spread all this all these lovely tips and tricks with them. I think a lot of up and coming artists will find so much value in it. So, for anyone that's maybe has other questions that maybe didn't get answered or wants some clearing up on stuff, where can they go to contact you and where can they go to follow you to keep up to date about what you have going on?
Thank you so much. I would say that I'm most active on my Instagram page in terms of social media, and you can find me at I&I Music Studio. That's IANDI Music.studio. And then again, if you'd like to email me and you've got questions or you'd like to join our catalog, I'm building a publishing catalog of independent artists, music, and it is free to onboard. You only have to be an active performing artist to qualify. So if you would like to become part of our publishing catalog, that's a concierge catalog. It's not like Song Trust, where you just upload your music and it's just out there. This is a concierge where we actively pitch music to other publishing companies around the world to get your music placed and played on radio stations wherever we can find your audience. So if you'd like to be a part of that, you can contact me at admin at iandimusic.studio. That's ADMIN at IANDIMUSIC.studio, STUDIO. And then you can check out what I'd really love you to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is the I&I Music Studio on YouTube. And we have our Soundstage Las Vegas playlist at our YouTube channel where you can check out independent artists here in the Las Vegas area and some others that are traveling through that have come on this stage and performed their original music acoustically. I say it's like MTV Unplugged meets VH1 pop-up video, kind of a combo of those two. We produce that right here. That is Soundstage Las Vegas, and you can find that on our YouTube channel, the I&I Music Studio. Thank you so much, Noah.
And I will put all this information in the description box below. So just go down below and find links to everything. Feel free to follow the podcast on the socials. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Music Talks Pod. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast. Feel free to also go to my website, noahspodcasts.com, to learn more about this show as well as the other things that are going on. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in today's episode. If you liked it, subscribe so you get notified of when new episodes like this come out in the future. I thank y'all so much for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Be safe, and I will catch you in the next episode of Music Talks.